Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the VBFA Podcast. Today I am honored to be sitting across the living room, I guess, of the backyard with Pastor Zach.
Yeah.
Not only is this my first guest on the podcast, this is Pastor Zach's first time on a podcast.
That's
so
right.
We're going to see how this goes.
That's right. I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty nervous, Seth.
we need to start a wall maybe behind me or somewhere in the room where like we hang pictures of our guests. Like you've seen those podcasts where they
like a wall of shame or
no, you stand there number one. You were my first guest.
So like a mugshot.
Speaking of that, have you seen the trend? And this may be old, but have you seen the trend at Cracker Barrel? Where, like you take an old Western photo of yourself
you put your
and
face
hang
on
it on the like you replace like a family picture from the 1800s and you put you like a Branson cowboy picture of yourself on the wall, black and white.
I did see that. I've seen many of those. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I have a couple of those hanging on the wall in my office, as it frequently gets called Cracker Barrel. So,
well, today you're starting off a little series where I'm going through the staff of the church, the pastors, and really just letting everybody get to know you. I mean, everybody sees you at church. They have, conversations maybe in passing, but they may not know really who you guys are as a person, your ministry, your heart behind the ministry. And so you're the first one up. And so I just wanted to kind of sit down with you. So tell me a little bit about Pastor Zach. Who is Pastor Zach outside off the stage, outside of the church?
So much stuff. Well, number one, I am the most awesome out of the pastoral staff. But no, on a more serious note, man, I don't know. From South Mississippi. A lot of people don't know where I'm from. I know a lot of the staff and volunteers for the church grew up in the church. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a native of Crawford County or Sebastian County or of Arkansas in general. I'm from South Mississippi.
And you can tell that in your accent.
Yeah, it's pretty. I got a pretty good drawl there.
Yeah.
But I grew up there, man. Deep South Mississippi, about an hour and a half from the water, near the Hattiesburg area. Mm-hmm. Grew up in a pastor's home. My dad's been a pastor. He actually was a pastor, and he was in the National Guard as well at the same time. So he did that for like 23 years. But yeah, man, I mean, grew up doing that, just grew up down there, and man, who am I? So like, what? Tell me what you want to know. Like, you want to know about like.
Well, like, what are your hobbies? Like, what do you like to do? Like on a Saturday, obviously you have a wife and 2 kids, so you probably don't have a ton of free time. But if you've got an hour or two for nothing on your calendar, what are you doing?
Man, obviously with the wife and kids, man, I got a beautiful wife, and I'm gonna say that I love my wife. Love you, Jordan. Give her that shout out. Yeah, my kids, Zayden and Sonny, and obviously, man,
who would you say out of those 2 kids take after you the most?
Zayden, 100%.
Okay.
They both look like me, but Zayden is more of my attitude and persona and personality. He just kind of, I don't think it's just that he's the boy of the 2, but. Man, he's pretty rough guy.
Yeah. When I see him running around in boots and shorts and a cowboy hat, I definitely think of you.
Oh, dude, 100%, 100%. Yeah. So, I don't know, man. To be completely honest with you, I spend a lot of time with my wife and kids. My wife's a nurse. She works, every other weekend right now. So typically, I'm either watching my kids or I'm trying to spend time with my wife and kids because I really do enjoy spending time with my family. I feel like that was something that, as a kid, growing up, that was something that I really enjoyed with my dad and my mom.
Yeah. Enjoyed
spending time with both of them. And my brother and sister. And so I feel like it's just good to have that family time. But if I have a couple hours, and go back to your question, if I had a couple hours free time to do what I wanted, man, I'm going to play disc golf.
Yeah.
I love it. A bunch of us guys started playing it. You started playing with us. And started playing a couple summers ago. Matter of fact, it'll be like 2 summers ago this summer. And so I would do that. And recently, you and I both, we started playing a little bit of golf.
We're trying.
We're not good.
No, not at all.
I'm better than.
We didn't come in last place in the men's tournament though, so I'll take that.
I think I'm better than Cody, but I'll let him speak for himself when he gets on the podcast. But no, man, I'd like to do it. I like to go more for the smack talk than the actual game.
Right.
I'm a better smack talker than I am a golfer and disc golfer as well. But
well, I don't know, man. You can sling a disc.
That's something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
a lot of fun. You recently got chickens.
Man, I got chickens. I don't know. It's the country boy coming out in me.
Yeah.
The farm life, grew up on a farm. Again, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, man. I would love for some of these people to be able to really see it, because it is the literal middle of nowhere where I grew up. But grew up on a farm.
You said the closest store was like how close to you guys?
So there's a gas station / restaurant / car wash / feed store / outdoor store, convenience store, all wrapped into one. And it's about 10 minutes from my house. And then the closest Walmart is 30 minutes, but that's like a standalone thing. There's not much in that little town. And then to get to anything other than a Walmart, it's an hour drive.
Good grief.
And that's just the way I grew up, man. It's wild, being so close to town now and everything being so convenient.
Right.
It's wild to think that it was just normal for us to just get in the car and drive an hour to get to a restaurant or town or whatever.
Yeah. That is crazy. So even Van Buren is a big city.
Oh yeah, Van Buren's a pretty decent sized town to me. Now I've obviously since I've been grown, I've traveled to some pretty large cities, but yeah, I would say this is a little definitely bigger than what I grew up around.
Yeah. So after, tell me a little bit about growing up and what role faith played in your family. You said your dad was a pastor, but obviously we all know, growing up, you're forced to go to church, you're forced to read in your Bible or go to Sunday school. But, growing up, what role did faith play in your life?
Well, man, at some point, faith obviously always part of my life. Like you said, again, reiterate what I said earlier, my dad's a pastor. My parents, they got to know one another at church. That's kind of where they met, and so they were involved in church heavily. And then my dad was called to ministry. I was born before my dad took the first church that he pastored. So obviously, like you said, I was drugged to church for so long, but at some point it just, I don't know. The faith that influence on my life, it took hold of me. And so it became not just something that I was forced to do, but something that I wanted to do, and God just changed me. I had that own experience. My parents for so long, the forcing came out of, I'm a kid. What kid, just loves it? You know what I mean? It's just kind of like anything. They're kind of pushed to do that. But at some point, my parents didn't have to push me anymore, because I just fell in love with God and doing his work. And so they didn't have to beg me anymore,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everybody, if they find themselves in church as an adult, has to have that experience on their own, because, when you get that freedom, it's a choice rather than, hey, get in the car, we're going to church.
Yeah.
So at what point growing up did you feel called into the ministry?
So I was 16 years old. I didn't really feel anything before that. I grew up going to church camps and all the conferences and CAs. I know that's kind of a thing of the past for a lot of places. But
explain that for people listening that doesn't know what that is.
CAs was a ministry of the Assemblies of God back in the day, and it stands for Christ's Ambassadors.
Yeah.
And basically, it was youth group. It was that was youth group for the church that my parents were part of, and that that had played a heavy role in my life. And so would go to CAs and just feel the presence of God, and then grew up doing all that. Well, then I was 16 years old, and man, I don't know. I actually had went over to a friend, a pastor's son was a friend of mine, and I went to his dad's church. They were in a revival, and man, the guy that was speaking, and man, he just preached, and I don't think it was necessarily anything that he was preaching. I think it was just God's time. It wasn't because to my recollection, he wasn't preaching on the call of God that night. It was just kind of like in that moment that I went to the altar, to receive from God and to pray. It was just like in that moment, I really felt God speaking to me, like, hey, like, that was the moment that God was saying, hey, I want you to do this. And man, I ain't gonna lie, dude, I was scared to death. I didn't want to do it. I watched my dad, and I tell people this, I watched my dad in ministry my whole life. He worked, he was in the military, and, he pastored, and man, I watched the struggles that he went through, firsthand. I watched him do funerals of kids that were burned up in their house, on Christmas Eve night, and watched him do funerals of a little girl that was, drowned in the lake when she was just a little girl, just barely walking good, drowned in the pond near their house. And so, I watched that side of things. And then I also watched how, people treat pastors, I mean, just being raw and real with you, I mean, it's like pastors, people look at them like, oh, there's this great person, but man, pastors get chewed out a lot behind the scenes. And, I don't know, man, I really didn't want to do it, but I just couldn't get away from it, man. God he just dealt with me, and I was like, I was in that moment.
What you were made to do.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, this is what I want you to do. And, man, I didn't know how it was going to happen or how it was going to end up, but, man, God's plan is awesome. I will say that. It's awesome.
That is awesome. And this next question may be like two parts, but did you have plans before being called in the ministry? And then second part, was it hard for you to give that up when you realized, like when it hit you, maybe that night that you were going to be called, or that you were called into the ministry and that's what you were doing? Was it hard for you to give up those plans?
Yeah. So, felt called to ministry, right? And this can be like an encouragement to people, to young people too, that feel called to ministry, that were young like I was. So I'm 16. I'm, sophomore in high school at this point, and trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. So I actually even went on after feeling called to ministry. I didn't know where my life was going to end up, didn't know what opportunities were going to present themselves to me as a young man feeling called to ministry. And so I actually ended up dual enrolling in college and doing some of my prerequisites while I was in high school. And they opened a new program while I was the first class to be a part of it at a local junior college, and they actually had a dual enrolled nursing program. So I actually was planning to go through nursing school. Oh, wow. So I did part of the way for like the whole entirety of my senior year of high school. I would go to high school for half a day, and then I would drive to the junior college, and I would sit in nursing classes for the second half of the day. And I did that for a full year. We got to the summer semester, and man, I don't know. There was a lot of factors that played into my decision to end up leaving nursing school. Yeah. Namely, just some of the care that you have to give to patients just didn't seem like it was going to be my thing. And so I backed out of that, and then I ended up getting into an electrical engineering program. Okay. And so I did that for 2 semesters. So the following year, right after and then man, so this is what's wild, right? So I'm called to ministry. I quit nursing school. I'm just searching, right? I'm looking. Right. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with going to secular college. And I've told a lot of people this. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to secular college, getting a degree, having a plan. You got to support yourself and your family, right? There. That is, I commend people for that. Man, I was in a spot where I didn't know what I needed to do or what I was supposed to do. And, I'm struggling spiritually because I'm like, God, what I need to do? Well, in engineering school, in this electrical engineering program, there was a teacher. I don't even remember her last name, but I know her first name was Lori. So Miss Lori, she was a Pentecostal lady, and man, I mean, the class I was in, nothing but guys. It's pretty rough in there, but man, she was such a light to me, man. I'm not kidding you. She just radiated Christ, and I remember just through being in her class and just feeling that, and then there was a moment where I felt like God spoke to me about what to do, and I called her. I was like, hey, I just want you to know that you impacted my life while I'm in this program. And so to be honest with you, it wasn't that hard for me to leave because she was telling me like, because when I left this, I went to Bible school. I ended up going to a Christian university and getting my degree in biblical studies, theology, and with an emphasis in missions, global missions. And so when I called her, man, it really wasn't that hard for me to leave that behind because I had been searching for peace in that area of my life for so long. And man, when I talked to her, I expected her to be disappointed. I didn't know what to expect, but man, she was so encouraging to me and told me like, that there's nothing that she would rather have than see somebody leave her class to follow God's will. That's right? Amazing. So that's pretty cool.
That's really cool. That's cool. That's cool how God put her in your path.
Yeah, absolutely.
To almost push you into what he wanted for you. Yeah. Because who knows if you would have made that decision as easily without her encouragement.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned you studied missions with an emphasis in missions.
I did.
most people probably know, but for those that don't, you and your wife, Jordan, not just visited Africa, but you lived in Africa.
We did.
So how did that come about, and what was that like?
So we were on staff, and man, both of us we still do feel like that God has got something related to missions that he wants to do in our life. We don't know what it is, but in that there was a moment where we were newly married, hadn't been married very long, and we didn't have any kids, and so we're like, we had an offer from a missionary that lived in West Africa, and he told us, "Hey, I want you guys to come if you want to." This is his exact wording. If you want to get your feet wet in missions, just let me know, and I will do everything I can to help you make that happen. And so, man, I told my wife about it. I had lunch with the guy, and so we ended up just forsaking all and put everything into a storage, letting our apartment lease go up, our townhome lease go up, and putting everything into a storage building, and off we went, man. And we raised money for a couple months, and we went to Africa and lived there for 6 months on the West African coast, the Northwest African coast. And it was really hot, and it was really humid, and it was hard. My wife, man, she'll tell you it was tough, but man, that was honestly, man, I feel like that the ministry I'm doing today is a product of what God did in my life while we were there. Because man, we were really struggling spiritually. We were really, really tired coming out of where we were before, and we just needed God to refresh us. And man, even as hot and humid as it was, man, God really just refreshed us. Yeah. And just did something in our life that's lasting. Not obviously we've had more spiritual encounters with God since then, but it's just like I can feel the lasting effects of what he did there in Africa to today. I mean,
that's
just
amazing.
Man.
I bet that was incredibly tough. I mean, obviously, you know, you were supposed to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But leaving your family,
it's tough, man.
You were used to a small city and having to drive to a Walmart, but there's no Walmart in Africa.
Dude, there ain't no Walmart there. You know, we were talking about somebody I was with the other day. We were talking about fried chicken places and KFC, and there was another like something fried chicken, but there was a YFC there where we were at. Yummy Fried Chicken on the KFC. But yeah, it was tough, man. That was a hard time for us. Not like relationally, Jordan and I together, just like physically, it was tough, hot, draining. And man, hey, I commend and give props to all the missionaries that do this day in and day out, week in and week out.
That's a job.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Speaking of going through a rough time, I was going to ask you, I wanted to kind of pick your thoughts on this, because an everyday Christian will go through ups and downs and struggle spiritually, and they'll show up to church and maybe not feel the worship or not feel the sermon, or, you know, they may skip a couple weeks of their Bible reading or not want to put on a worship song because they're just not feeling it. They're like in a spiritual dry season. Yeah. And sometimes we forget that, you know, even our pastors that lead us spiritually go through the same thing. It's Absolutely. Not, you know, the pastor Zach we see every Sunday morning and Sunday night up on that stage encouraging everyone in a worship. Maybe he doesn't leave that stage on a Sunday and that Monday keep that same energy. You go through the same struggles. So when you find yourself in a dry spot, when you find yourself in a spiritual drought, how do you handle that? And what do you do to really lean into God and try to get out of that?
Man, you know, there have been several times. I mean, it's hard. It's crazy to think about, but, you know, I felt called to ministry when I was 16. I took my first job at a church when I was 18, and I'll be 28 this year. You know, so it's wild to think about. You know, it's almost 10 years since I've been actively in full-time ministry, and in 10 years, which is not as long as a lot of people, but in 10 years, man, I mean, there have been a lot of dry seasons, and, you know, it's almost like there's just something in me, you know, that just keeps telling me, like, you can't quit, you know, like you can't give up. And, you know, there are times when I've said, God, I'm done. This is it. Yeah. I don't want to do this anymore. But then inside there's just like that still small voice that's just like, you can't give up.
Right.
You can't do it. Like, look at all that God's done. Look at how far you've come.
Right. Look
at all the blessings He's given you, and you just got to keep going.
Yeah.
You got to keep pressing. And there are times, man. There's times, when there've been days where I didn't read my Bible, and there are days still where I don't read my Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and be like, oh, Pastor Jay, he didn't read his Bible. Man, look, I don't think God's looking down on me, and He's got his board up there in the sky where He's writing my name down and putting check marks out by my name, because I am faithful to be in the Word. I'm faithful to be in prayer. I'm faithful to spend time with God. But there are days, still where it's just a struggle.
Right.
But man, come on, that's the Word of God, right? He didn't tell us that, that being a soldier of Christ was easy. He said, fight the good fight of faith. It's a fight. It's a struggle. And then He told us to endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. So, there are times when you may not feel like it, but man, if you could just hold on. And I thought about this before I came in today. Man, God's just faithful, right?
Amen.
His nature's faithful. He's a faithful God. He's always going to be faithful to us. So, sometimes you just have to, when you're having a tough time, you just have to remember, like, no matter what is causing that time, whether it be, financial stress, or, your kids won't behave, or your kid's grown and they're acting crazy, or, you got a spouse that is driving you up the wall, or, just whatever the problem may be, or the enemy's tempting you, you just got to remember in those times, man, God's faithful, and He will always see you through, give you a word, give you a way out, be with you through it. He's faithful.
Yeah. I'm sure there were plenty of days you'd rather be working at yummy fried chicken than pastoring. But no, I like that. And it's encouraging to any Christian, but especially someone that might be listening that's young in the faith, to know there's not a quota on what you have to do, how many chapters you have to read, how many worship songs you have to listen to. It's, did you encounter God today? Did you feel His presence?
That's right.
And I like that.
I'll tell you what changed me, man. This guy was not my brother-in-law yet, but he's married to my sister now, and we kind of got to be friends before he and my sister got together dating. But he called me, and we were just talking, man, just randomly. I'll never forget what this dude says, and I hope this dude watches the podcast. He's my brother-in-law.
Yeah,
I hope he watches
hopefully
this,
he
because he told me one time, a long time ago, this was years and years ago, he was like, man, when it comes to God, he's like, it is about quality over quantity. And I know we say that about other things, but it is. If you're reading 10 chapters a day, but you're not getting anything out of it, I would rather you read one chapter and, or 10 verses and really get something out of those 10 verses than read 10 chapters. Because it is not about how much you're consuming, but about the quality and the time that you're putting into what you're consuming.
Yeah.
And so I would say that to anybody that's watching that's a new believer, man. It's not about how much, but about what you're doing with what you got.
I like that. So what is going on at VBFA currently that you're most excited about? And there's a lot of things going on.
There's a lot of stuff going on, man. But I think the thing that excites me most about what is going on is, man, there's a shift happening in our church.
I agree.
And like all the pastoral staff, we talk about it literally all the time, but anybody that attends our church regularly can tell you there's a shift happening right now. There's something going on in our church that is unlike anything that this church has experienced before. And I'll be here 3 years in October. And in the 3 years I've been here, man, this feels different than anything that I've ever been a part of. There is a turn, a shift taking place here at Van Buren First Assembly.
That's amazing. And if you've been in the services, you can feel it.
Man,
God is definitely feel it.
Dude,
it's like
God's pouring His Spirit out,
just
man.
Switched.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been amazing. Well, let's wrap it up here. I know I've kept you probably longer than you wanted to stay. Hopefully you're not still nervous.
I don't even know how long this has been going on, but
So one thing I want to do as we end the podcast, I'm going to call this last segment as we end it a word of wisdom.
Okay.
And so as my first guest, you're going to be the guinea pig with this segment.
Oh boy.
If you could leave the person listening to this podcast with one thought, with what is on your heart right now, it can be spiritual, not spiritual, something to do with life, a life hack, or something that God's speaking to you. What's on your heart? What's in your spirit? Tell us about it.
Man, I mean, I don't know that I could make it not spiritual. I think for me, it's got to be spiritual, you know, and to anybody that wants to do a non-spiritual one, kudos to them. No judgment whatsoever, but man, with everything that's happening in our world today, and all that's going on with, you know, our government and with the revivals that are taking place all over our land and all over the world, man, I think that for anybody listening, my word of wisdom would be, man, make sure your heart right with God. Make sure your heart's right with God. Make sure there's not anything in there that would prevent you from making it to heaven if Christ was to come back, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, hey, I've heard it my whole life, and I hear that too. Man, I've heard it my whole life. Hey, but you know what, man, I'm just telling you, this shaking, the shaking and the shifting that's happening in our church is happening in a lot of churches, and this revival that's taking place, I mean, hey, it could very well be the last big revival before Christ returns. Yeah. So make sure you're right with God.
I like that. Well, thank you for sitting down with me today, having this conversation.
It's been a blessing and an honor, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if anybody listening hasn't been to church with us, come experience worship. This next Sunday, Pastor Zach will be leading, him and the worship team. If you have any chicken questions, if you need to know what to put in your chicken's water and your chicken's food, this is the guy.
That's right.
But until next month, this is the VBFA Church Podcast.